we are.
Yes. How about we each do a little introduction? Or wait, how about we introduce each other? I will introduce. This is my friend Nicolette. And I've known you, Nicolette, for 10 years, something like that. And I first found out about you when I had learned about Sudbury Valley School, and then found out that somebody had set up a campus in Edmonton, which was north of me. I was in Calgary at the time, which is also where we're near here today. And I reached out to you, and you talked my ear off, and I was so lit up to hear about, you know, what I would call now like your experiment, doing this in this, I mean, you'll tell more about it. So, and then we went on other adventures together. You introduced me to Alison Armstrong and her work at PAX.
Yeah.
And we're still both crazy about that kind of work, about men and women and partnership.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then, Alan, I met you, gosh, not even a year ago, hey?
Yeah.
Or maybe about a year ago.
About a year ago, yeah, in the spring.
Mm-hmm. And when Brianna and I were looking for a space to have Expand the Box happen, which is the kind of the foundation course in possibility management. Possibility management being a game world that has for 45 or so years been creating distinctions, tools, maps, processes that empower next culture. So all of this is kind of tied together, I think, by this next culture kind of thread.
All three of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you with your expertise in the area of like law of mankind and natural law, which is also something that Nicolette and I have gotten into together a little bit. Yeah. And people we both know who have been experts or experimenters in those fields.
Yeah, for me it's more theoretical still at this point. I have a good grasp on it, and I've had some experiments with living it, but there's a lot more for me to, for the rest of my life to be experimenting with there. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we're right now we're on the land. We're on land called the Ark Land Project, and Jordy's not here right now, but I look forward to you meeting her later and finding out more about the project here, where Alan has been for a few months. Oh gosh, there's so many different directions. But what we're here mainly to talk about today is about kids and learning environments and what I've been starting to call initiation processes. The work that I'm doing with possibility management is all about initiation, and it's kind of like catching up on initiations that we didn't get as kids and teenagers and young adults, and more in the realm of emotional and energetic growing up. And one of the things I love about what they do at Sudbury is you know, really like they don't miss steps so much. And I'm appalled often when I'm even like with parents and their kids or in kind of educational settings, and the kids are learning things, but so much is just left for them to figure out themselves, which they do great at. And I'm so proud of how much I figured out on my own as a kid. But just the Sudbury model and similar models to it that are about, you know, children leading their own learning adventures and having grown-ups as mentors and maybe coaches and alongside, but not as teachers, not as like the superior all-knowing one who is trying to get the kids to learn what they're supposed to learn, what's good for them to learn in the way that they're meant to learn it, to fit into the rows and the boxes and the hierarchy. So I'll stop talking now.
I feel excited about all of this, like to break the hierarchy thing. And like what you're talking about, and I look forward to hearing about how that specifically works for. And it's the Sudbury model, is it, or was
Yeah,
it
it's based on the Sudbury Valley School, which is just outside Boston.
Okay.
And that school's been open since 1968. And it was actually a group of teachers from public school who were looking at getting ready to send their kids to school, and they said, wait a minute, we don't want to send our kids into this system that we're part of. Mm-hmm. And so they said, what kind of school do we want for our kids? And they decided to kind of go from the end point and work their way back. So they said, when our kids are 18 and done school, who do we want them to be? What kind of people do we want them to be? And of course, they want to be happy and self-motivated and driven, and they wanted them to be good democratic citizens. And so they said, okay, so all these things that we've determined we want our kids to be, how do we get them there? Mm-hmm. And they basically said, well, if they're going to be all these things, they have to live all these things as they're growing up. And so they decided, okay, well, then we need a school that's democratic so they can experience the democratic process and be part of it. And we need X, Y, and Z so that these kids can grow up to be these kinds of people. Mm-hmm. And that's how the Sudbury Valley School came to be.
Sudbury Valley School.
Yeah.
1968.
1968, okay. Yeah.
So it's a long-running experiment.
Yeah.
And they have, from the beginning, they have studied themselves and got other people to come and study them to kind of check that they're doing what they set out to do. Mm-hmm. So it has been very, like, empirically kind of, well, it's like, it's an experiment, and they've been getting feedback and using the feedback to change things. But from what I heard, they started out pretty strong.
Yeah. I mean, they've published several books. Like, they've had several books published about their school, and they've published books themselves. And but I think probably the greatest proof of how successful their school is the number of their graduates who just waltz right into post-secondary institutions. And, you know, without any kind of a transcript, without any kind of high school marks, they just basically, they might set up an interview, for example, with a college and say, you want me at your school because, and then they go on and tell them all the reasons why. And the people at the admissions, like the registrars and stuff, are so impressed with these people. Like, yeah, we definitely do want you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the real results right there.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
And that so many other people around the States, around the world, have got, heard about this model and then have kind of duplicated it or replicated it in some way, and that there's this conference that I know you've been to a few times that they have, where they're kind of like sharing what they've learned and saying, go ahead, we're not going to keep this to ourselves and turn it into a franchise. We're actually going to like encourage and empower other people in other places to set something up that's similar. Yeah. And then that's what you did.
Mm-hmm. That's what I did. Yeah.
So you ran a school.
I did.
For...
Yeah. Well, at first I was a teacher in the public school system for 10 years. And toward the end of my 10 years, something went sideways for me. And I just thought, this isn't working. Like, I had a class of, I had a homeroom with 35 grade 9 kids. And I was constantly telling them, don't talk. And I'm thinking, they're 14 years old. They're built to talk. That's what teenagers do. How does it make sense that I'm sitting here constantly telling them don't talk? Yeah. And I had kids who were stressed to the max and crying because they didn't understand math. And, these super, super achievers who had ulcers in, grade 9. And I'm thinking, there's something so wrong with this. And, some really beautiful kids who just did not fit in the box that school was. And they had every label under the sun, and, doctors wanted to drug them and stuff. And I'm just thinking, there's something so broken about this. And so actually in my second year of teaching, I'd read a book about the Sudbury Valley School. And at the time I wasn't disillusioned yet, so I put it on my shelf and just left it there. But in my 10th year, I just suddenly thought about that book, and I went, wait a minute. And I pulled it back off my shelf and started looking into it, wanted to see if they were still around. And of course they were still around. And so I started, I ordered their school starting kit, which was this massive box that came with all these books and videos. And I started pouring through the material, and I thought, yeah, this makes sense to me. This is what I want to do. So I quit teaching. I handed in my resignation letter. I didn't have anything to fall back on. I had a mortgage to pay. I didn't have any savings. It was like, yeah, but I'm starting one of these schools.
Oh, awesome.
So
yes, that's so awesome.
Yeah, so then I just started talking to anybody who would listen to me about this school. I'm like, you gotta, this is what I'm doing. And I just blah, 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 blah. I'm telling everybody, even in Safeway store lineups. I was like, yeah, there's this different kind of schooling. And soon enough, I ended up with another teacher who had also quit the system. And he's like, I'm in. I'm going to do this with you. And so we spent a year kind of putting the paperwork together and trying to figure out how we were going to work it. And we ended up finding a building. It was a wing of an old elementary school building in Edmonton. And we rented that. We didn't have a single student signed up yet when we signed the $5,000 a month lease. And it was like, we're doing it. So, but we just kept talking to people. And then I think it was at the beginning of August, I sent out a press release to all the major media. And I ended up getting a front page Edmonton Journal article about our school and all kinds of interviews on like Global and different like TV news stations and other newspapers and stuff. And when we opened our doors on like the first school day of September, we had 20 kids, which was really unheard of in the Sudbury community. Like most Sudbury schools kind of start as just these little homeschooling pods that meet in somebody's house and kind of slowly they grow. But we actually had a building. We had a fully supplied building because as I'd been talking to everybody about what I was doing, people were donating things left, right, and center. So we had art supplies and we had computers and we had books and we had sewing things and we had everything. It was amazing. And so we started with this kind of fully equipped school with 20 kids, and it was amazing. It was so wonderful.
And it lasted 6 years, but there's a lot more to the story.
Yeah, yes, we were open for 6.5 years. After our second year, we always wanted to be out in the country because the original Sudbury Valley School is in this old, I think, mansion in.
We'll have to put
in
the
country.
Link to the.
Yeah,
to their
Sudbury
website
Valley School.
With the video, and especially this one video that's on their website.
Good one. Yeah. Yeah, so we wanted to be out in the country, and so my business partner, his wife was really good at stock market things and stuff, and so she ended up actually finding us this amazing 152 acre property with like a 9,000 square foot house. And so she ended up managing to buy that for the school. And so we moved out there and they still had bison on the property. So it was fantastic. Like it was such a great place to have a school. And so we ended up kind of at the height of my school, which at the time was called Indigo Sudbury Campus. We had, I think, 47 students and 3 staff members. And our students ranged in ages from 4 through to 19. We had all the different ages mixed together, and it was absolutely the most magical, rewarding thing I've done in my life, those 6.5 years.
That's,
So people
pretty
are
inspiring.
going to want to know what makes a Sudbury style school, like how is it different? What's so great about it?
What's so great about it? Everything is so great about it. Okay, so to just kind of boil it down to the 2 basic concepts of a Sudbury school is it's a democratic school and it's basically an unschooling school. So kids come to the school every day and they just spend their whole entire day doing what they love, doing what interests them, doing what makes them happy, exploring things. Just there's no set curriculum, there's no set testing. Everything happens only if the kids ask for it. So that's the unschooling part of it. And then the democratic part of it, which is also super cool, is every student has an equal vote in the school. And so once a week there's something called a school meeting, and that's where everybody gathers who wants to participate, and they talk about whatever needs to be talked about. It can be how we're spending the money in the school. It can be, if there's somebody who wants to volunteer at the school, there's a whole process for that. It could be about making some kind of a new rule for the school, or kind of solidifying something, because in my school we actually were very different from other Sudbury schools because we just kind of had one umbrella rule. So our one umbrella rule was be respectful, responsible, and reasonable. And that was it. We didn't have this big long, like other Sudbury schools have these big law books that they call them, and they really spell out all the different rules of the school. And I guess we kind of ended up having something like that. We called it our campus agreements, and it was just kind of things that we'd agreed on along the way to help the school run a little more smoothly, and so that everybody knew, like, yeah, we've agreed on this. Like, for example, with potlucks, we had a monthly potluck. and we all agreed that it had to remain just with direct family. Like some people wanted to bring their friends from school and their cousins and their this and their that. And because of our limited space, we said, yeah, let's just limit it to just your direct family. So that was one of our campus agreements. It went in our document. It was voted on. Yep. Yeah. A really beautiful part about the school was, and something that usually people are pretty surprised about, is as part of the democracy, we had an election every spring, and the staff members' names went on the ballots, and the kids voted whether or not the staff members came back. So I had no job security. There was nothing that said, just because you're here this year means you're going to be here next year. It was completely up to the kids. They voted, and even like little 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds who couldn't write yet, like the older students would kind of go behind the ballot box with them and tell them what was on the little paper and help them to check the boxes and stuff. And it was a really amazing process because the kids were actually very discerning about it. I remember that there was a certain period where one of the staff members, the kids were kind of having some issues with him, but when it came time to vote in the spring about it, they still voted for him to come back because they knew what an asset he was to the school. So even if maybe 1 or 2 kids had a personality conflict with him, they still saw that he was a really great asset to the school, and it just wouldn't be the same without him. So they said, yeah, he can still come back, even though me personally, whatever their feelings were. Another part of that democratic process was, we didn't want a school where the adults were the authorities and kind of the problem solvers when there were issues. We wanted that to be a full community thing. Mm-hmm. So as per every Sudbury Valley or every Sudbury model school, we had a judicial committee. And so with our one rule, be respectful, responsible, reasonable, if somebody broke that rule, then somebody else could write a report about it, and it went to the judicial committee. And every day the judicial committee would meet, and it was a rotation of students and staff. I think we changed it every 2 weeks or something. And so they would all gather in a little room, and they would pull out the reports, and then they would bring in everybody who'd been written up on a report. And then we'd say, okay, so you wrote up this report and you were written up, so give us both your sides of the story. And so then they'd give all the information about it. And then it was up to the judicial committee to decide, okay, well, yeah, you're guilty of being irresponsible, but the person who wrote it up might have done something wrong too. And they say, okay, wait a minute, but you're actually part of this too. So we're going to say that you're also responsible in this situation. So, and then we would give the students the first right to come up with a solution. So what's your consequence going to be? And I remember we had this one little boy who just could not manage to clean up after himself. He just left messes everywhere he went. And so finally, we were trying to come up with consequences for him, and he couldn't think of any, and the committee was having a hard time. And finally it's like, well, how about that you just can't go in the room where you left a mess? And so he started by losing the art room, and he couldn't go in the art room because he'd left a mess there. But it got so bad that eventually the only place he could be was in the hallway. So he came to school and he just had to hang out in the hallway all day because he'd lost the rooms. And so obviously we'd figured out ways that he could earn the rooms back. And so, pretty quickly he was back in all the rooms again. But we were really trying to have consequences that made sense and that weren't just punitive or, and so again, with the whole democracy, all the kids were involved in this process. And so it wasn't just a kid being upset and running to an adult and going, so-and-so did this, and then the adult going, you can't do that. It was like, okay, well, we got to write this up to the judicial committee. The judicial committee will take care of it. And so that's how things got done. We also had a mediation process in case the kids didn't want to go to, if somebody didn't want to write somebody else up, they wanted to solve it in the moment, then they could just initiate a mediation process where a staff member and then the 2 kids would just go sit in a room somewhere and see if they could talk it out and work it out. But even then, there was a report written that went to the judicial committee to review, because we did have some students who were really manipulative, and they figured, oh, well, if we just do mediation, I'm not going to get in as much trouble as if we go to judicial committee. So then they would kind of get their way out of it in mediation, but then the judicial committee would look at it and go, okay, wait a minute, no, we need to review this and pull those people back in and deal with it a little bit more in depth. But yeah, so there was a school meeting where the kids voted on everything. Everything was discussed. We ran it using Robert's Rules of Order, so it was very structured. And they had to make motions, second motions. There was a chair. It was a fantastic process. And, kids learned to public speak. They learned to, stand up and voice their opinions. It was some kids who came in super shy and didn't want to do anything. By the time they left the school, blah, blah, and this is what I think about this. And it was really, really great. Awesome. So yeah, we had the school meeting, we had the judicial committee, and then there was just kind of the whole unschooling part of it that was super magical.
And I want you to tell about how kids leave such a school.
Okay, so there's something called the thesis defense, and we kind of changed it a little bit at our school because we had a really brilliant young man who was like, so basically the thesis defense is if students want to graduate from the school, because it's not officially a school the way other schools are with a diploma. So what they do is they write a thesis, and in the thesis they're basically saying, I'm a reasonable, responsible adult, and these are my plans as I go out into the greater world. And then what happens is this thesis gets copied and sent to all the different students, staff, and even the parents are included in this. They get to read the thesis statement as well. And then there's something called a thesis defense. So it's a, kind of a big deal. There's this evening that's set up and everybody comes and, the students that are defending their thesis come, and then they have to stand at the front of the room and anybody in the audience can ask them questions about their thesis. And they have to answer them. And then at the end of the night, everybody who's present votes on whether or not they agree that this person, should graduate and get their certificate or diploma from the school. So as I was saying, we had this one student who was going to embark on this thesis process, but he's like, I don't see why we're calling it a thesis defense. He goes, I've got nothing to defend. I'm just sharing with you where I'm at and what I'm doing. And if you don't like it, whatever, but I'm not defending anything. And so we're like, yeah, good point. So we ended up changing it. We called it a thesis deepening instead of a thesis defense. Nice. And so it was just a way for people to ask questions and get more information and go a little more in depth in terms of what the kids wrote. So that was the process by which they kind of officially graduated from the school.
I like this about the not defending, but rather just sharing where I'm at and open to feedback without kind of the againstness or something. I mean, that's how I take the word defense. It's kind of like I have to have my position and I have to win about it almost. Yeah. That's kind of the flavor in it for me. But the deepening, I like that. Yeah. Collaborative. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. And so students moving out from the school could choose whether they wanted to have a certificate and go that route and do the thesis deepening. Yeah,
or they could just leave.
Yeah,
they could just leave. We had some students who just left. They didn't want to do that. And we had others who were like, yes, I want to get my diploma. So it was a really nice process. Yeah.
So I'm curious about how it works day to day. Was there like a morning meeting or something and then people talk about, or they just come and show up and it's like they check in with themselves about what I want to do today? How does it work?
Yeah. I think it probably varies a little bit from school to school, but at our school, the kids would come in, they would just have to sign in. So we had that the kids had to have, I think, 25 hours per week. They had to be at the school, if I remember right. Sorry, it's been a while. So they had to have at least 5 hours per day. Or kind of an average. So, but if the kids wanted to get all of their 25 hours in 4 days and have a long weekend, they could do that too. So what we did is when they would come in the morning, we had a sign-up sheet. So they just signed in so that we knew who was in the building and who wasn't. And then at the end of the day, they had to sign out. And that way we could check their hours and make sure they were there as long as they needed to be. And so basically they would come in the morning and they would just go do whatever. So if they wanted to go play video games, or if they wanted to go just find their friends and hang with their friends, or we had teenagers and they would just come in and all sit down on the couches and spend most of their days just talking on the couches. And but I remember at one point we tracked we tracked their conversations just to kind of see what kind of topics they were covering. And in one of our newsletters, we had it actually all alphabetized. And it was from astronomy down to like quantum physics to psychology, like you name it, they covered it in conversation. And we always valued conversation in our school as a massive learning tool because these kids would sit down and just talk about this, that, and the other. And sometimes they go really deep, and sometimes it was like a 2-minute conversation and they'd be going off to other things. But they really talked about so many things. And I think that in our society today with kids, we just forget how valuable conversation is and how much kids can learn just from talking to each other about things. And, suddenly, that sounds really interesting. I want to explore that more. And like, I remember, this is not a conversation piece, but in terms of kids being exposed to things, at one point we had 5 and 7-year-old girls, and they decided to go outside for a walk in the wintertime, and they found a dead hare. And they thought, well, that's pretty cool. So they brought it inside and they let it defrost, and then they dissected it with one of the staff members. And of course, news travels really quickly in the school. So all the other kids, oh, there's a dissection in the kitchen. So everybody comes running. And then the kids who were interested stayed, and the kids who were grossed out or weren't interested, they left. And so it was just these really spontaneous learning experiences that happened. We didn't have any set curriculum. There was no requirement ever for testing. It was really about what do the kids want to do. And so during our time, we had drama classes. We had some people come in to teach fencing. We had a lady come in to teach Japanese. And it was all because the kids asked for it. So I remember the original Sudbury Valley School, they thought, well, we're going to offer classes. So they had this big bulletin board, and then they just posted like, we're going to offer this class and we're going to offer this class. And they were very disappointed because nobody showed up. So like, okay, well, I've got this great class plan, but nobody's here. And then they realized that unless the kids initiate it, unless it comes from them, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work. And so even at the original Sudbury Valley School, they ditched all the classes and they just said, we're here if you want us as a staff members. We're here. This is what I teach. This is what she teaches. If you want to learn any of that stuff, you know where to find us. And so it was more in that way that the kids ended up organizing classes. And that was the same thing with us. They would come to campus, or usually what we asked them to do is, like when the kids wanted Japanese classes, I said, okay, go around, talk to everybody, make a list of all the people who want to take Japanese classes, and then bring it to campus meeting. So then they bring it to campus meeting, say, all these people want to take Japanese classes, vote on it, great, let's find a teacher. And then usually it was up to me. I would go find somebody who could, through our network of people and stuff, I would just, anybody know anybody who teaches Japanese? And then usually we found somebody and we would bring them in. And we always told them off the bat, like, this is going to last as long as the kids are interested. And as soon as they're not interested anymore, sorry, you're out the door. So, and that's just kind of how it went. So I remember our fencing class went probably for about a month, and then the kids were like, oh, this is such hard work, and that was the end of that. But drama went a little bit longer, I think, and Japanese, it started with like 15 kids and it kind of petered down to about 5, and that was okay. You know, it was just the way it went, and that's we just supported everything that they wanted to learn.
It's so interesting to hear about, because it's so opposite from the school I went to, where it was like all about force and structure. Basically, this is what's going on and you got to show up, and there's all these. So it's neat to hear about that the students, well, the beings came out of the school empowered to live good lives by the sound of it. And it's like so out of the box. I want to like hear more and like comprehend and be with how it happened. Do you have any more like noteworthy things or experiments that happened that really were telling, or maybe broke your frame around the old way versus the new way?
Well, one of my favorite parts of the school was the whole age mixing thing, because of course in regular school, the kids are segregated by age. You got your grade 1s, grade 2, grades 3s, and the grade 6s don't think the grade 1s are cool. And, you know, the grade 1s look up to the grade 6s, and it's just this segregation. And in our school, everybody just mixed together. And I remember this beautiful, beautiful moment that we had this in our first and second year. We had this really burly, big teenager guy, kind of the mohawk and the nasty t-shirts with like the heavy metal bands and the blood and gore and stuff. And he was just this big, tough dude. And he was 16, I think, at the time. And we had this little girl who was 8, and her name was Anne-Marie. And she just loved this big, burly guy named Dylan. She just loved him. She thought he was the greatest thing. And he was just constantly like, oh my God, would you leave me alone? And one day, Dylan was already at school, and Anne-Marie arrived at school, and Dylan was coming down the hallway, and Anne-Marie saw him, and her eyes just lit up, and she's like, Dylan! And she went running at him, and I just thought, oh man, he's gonna... Instead, he opened his arms, she jumped up on him, and he picked her up, and he went walking off with her into one of the rooms, and I just thought, that is so beautiful. Like, that is just so great. And I remember one of our first campus meeting chair girls, she was also about 14, 15. And she's like, one of my best friends is a 6-year-old. It was so awesome. Cute. Yeah. And I mean, as far as like learning things, I mean, we had a kid, he was 12 or 13 when he came to us, and he was brilliant with computers. But he had failed computers in school because he didn't want to just do the stuff in school that they were telling him to do, right? So when he came to our school and he could actually let loose with computers, it was no time before he was hiring himself out at $25 an hour at age 13, networking people's offices, building computers for people, fixing computers. Like, it was fantastic. He set up our whole entire computer room. We had this, like in our school, because it was a former house, they had a swimming pool area, but they covered over the pool. And so we just had rows of desks with all the computers on them. And so all the kids would be in this room. And then because it had a super tall ceiling, we put our trampoline in there. So at one end, we had this magnificent spring-free trampoline. And then all the way the rest of the room, we had all the computers. And the kids would sit at these desks and play computers. And because it was like, I don't know, it was World of Warcraft. I can't remember all the games they played. But a lot of it was like kind of team stuff where they were hooked together through the internet. And they were kind of on teams. And they had alliances going. And they were constantly discussing and strategizing. And all this stuff that was going on that just, people who are all freaked out about video games is like, oh my God, they're playing video games all day. But when you go in there and hear their conversations and they're talking about economics and marketing and buying and selling goods and all this stuff that's happening in their games, it's like, wow. And I remember we had one boy, he came to us, I think in grade 6, and he'd had a real struggle in school. He was labeled ADD and just real kind of a social outcast and stuff. And literally for his first 2 years with us, he played video games every day. And his mom was thrilled. And we're like, why are you so happy? Most people aren't really happy about that. And she said, my son, for the first time, is a social being. He is interacting with everybody. He's got friends. He's fully involved. And what was neat was that after a while, he kind of gravitated away from the video games and got more into mechanics and wanted to learn about welding and stuff. So it's not like he just kind of got glued on computers forever. His interest, and we saw that with all the kids. They had free reign with these computers, and yet they tended to stay somewhat balanced. Like some kids were just diehard kind of techies, like that one young man who was, so good. He was on computers a lot. But if there was something interesting going on somewhere else in the school, the computer room would empty, and the kids would all just want to go find out what's going on over there. Yeah, and I remember one girl who, she couldn't spell to save her life because she didn't like to read, but when she came to our school, she started reading those Japanese manga books where you start at the back and come all the way to the front, and it's mostly like, graphics and stuff. And her mom was like, my daughter's spelling has improved so much. And it's like, that's probably because she started reading, because she doesn't have to read books she's not interested in. She can actually read these lovely manga books that she really enjoys. And I remember, too, that after her first month in school, she came to me and said, Nicolette, I'm so excited. I lost 10 pounds. And I'm like, you lost 10 pounds? And it was just from running around outside and playing on the hay bales and, just being active rather than sitting in a desk all day.
Yeah.
And we found that with the kids. They were so active and running around outside. And we had this one boy who was in school, and his mom came to us and she's like, you've got to save my kids. They're going to end up in jail. Like, they were so unhappy in school. They were in like behavior classes and they were constantly being suspended, and they were so angry, just angry to the core. And so we said, no problem, your kids can come to our school. We welcome everybody. And they were a bit of a handful, but we worked with them and they ended up being just stellar human beings. And the one guy, the younger brother, he just had so much energy. He was constantly rollerblading, biking. He would like run in the living room and then kind of flip off the wall. Like he was just, we had a little rebounder trampoline, like the little mini trampoline in our living room. I think we had one or two of them. And he would like set up these piles of cushions, and then he would like jump on the rebounder and see if he could get over all the cushions. And then, so he would set this up, and before long there would be like a lineup of kids who all wanted to try this. And that was just how things evolved in the school, like activities. It was just one kid would have this idea and start setting, like they had after Halloween, they had this Halloween candy market. And all the kids, they set up all their goods from Halloween all the way around the living room. And then they were like trading. It's like, well, I don't like these. How many of those will you give me for these? And then I remember one kid's like, oh, I got to go to the bathroom. I'll pay you 2 Smarties to watch my candy. Like it was brilliant. Like it was so much fun. And then there were kids who kind of wanted to set up businesses. I remember one kid wanted to bring a pop machine into the school. And this was a really interesting thing because, so he wanted to install this pop machine. It's like, okay, well, if you're going to install this pop machine, you're going to have to pay the school rent because you're using electricity, you're using space. He's like, okay, so we'll have to figure that out. So this was all done at campus meeting, of course. So the whole group of people where everybody votes on stuff. And one of the staff members were like, well, I've got this concern because pop is not really good for you. And so we ended up having this massive discussion about pop and about water and about juice and in the end, the motion that was brought forward was this kid could have his pop machine in the school, but only if he made sure always to have a slot for water and always to have a slot for juice, and the rest could be pop. And so, and the kids voted on that, so it wasn't just like, oh yeah, high sugar, let's have all the pop. It was like, okay, well, the kids heard the staff members' concerns, and then we kind of, hummed and hawed and back and forth, and yeah, and then they made their decision, and we had kids who had little bake sales in the kitchen. So I remember this one girl one time, she was baking brownies, and another little boy came by and dipped his finger in the batter. He's like, and she's like, hey, you're stealing my profits. It's like, just little things like that were just so priceless.
Yeah. I love hearing about the juice and water example, and that it just lands for me the value of like non-hierarchical collaborative decision making without any expectations that because someone's young that they should be in a certain position. Because for me, I know I really have a strong desire for autonomy, or it's like a thing for me. So if people are working on power with me, that really works. But if someone's telling me what to do, it's really hard for me and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But just to hear about that example and how it ended up, the pop machine had all three. It had pop and water and juice in it, but that it's actually working and that the solutions are coming about.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love hearing about that.
Yeah.
So we're talking about this in March of 22. And I think this is going to be interesting for a lot of people out there, and we've been mentioning to each other and watching how the world's changed during COVID times, and how then schools went on to Zoom and back and forth, and a lot of parents started being like, okay, I want something different for my kids. And I know that, I know of some people in the Calgary area and people all around the world really who started doing some kind of form of alternate schooling. And you work now as a homeschool facilitator. And so, I think this is going into some interesting territory. Like, we break out into interesting territory from what happened in your experiences. I had experience as a day home operator. So it was younger kids who were coming before or after school, except for the littlest ones who are home during the day. So I've seen this how it can go when kids of different ages have a space, and there's stuff in the space, and there's someone, guardian of the space and guardian of the mediator for the conflict, and the magic that can happen. And I so want this for kids. I so want it. And I think that there are a lot of parents who now, because of everything from masking to vaccine mandates to just thinking differently about life now, are also wanting something different. Some of them have started. Some of them are maybe just now getting going because other things are coming down the pipeline. What would you say to parents, maybe even kids, who want something radically different?
The first thing that I always invite, I've talked to a number of groups that have wanted to put something together, and the first thing that I always tell them they need to do is a absolutely need to narrow down what exactly it is they want to have for their, I guess, school or whatever they want to call it, their educational center, because you can't please everybody. And what we found with our school was a lot of parents liked the idea of it, but the reality of it was really scary for them. So they maybe enrolled their kids and then saw their kids doing nothing all day, and then they got scared. And so then they would come to us and say, well, couldn't you just like offer a math class, or couldn't you maybe like do some goal setting with the kids, and they were basically trying to get us to change what we were offering. And so my business partner and I had very early on kind of realized, just based on listening to other Sudbury schools and stuff, we kind of realized we need to nail this down so that it can't be changed. So what we did was we created what we called our charter. And in our charter, we outlined our philosophy of education. So this is what we believe about education. And then we outlined the operation of the school, which was, the democracy, the judicial committee, all that stuff. So we had that outlined, and any family who came to our school had to sign the charter and say, I've read this. I am because we had a big interview when we had an admissions interview. So people didn't just kind of come and sign up and here's your kids. They had to sit down with me, go through exactly how the school operates. So I was sure that they understood. And then they had to sign the charter and say, yes, I'm signing up for this. This is what I want for my kids. And that protected us from them later coming back and saying, oh, couldn't you offer curriculum? Couldn't you do this? Couldn't you do some testing? It's like, no, you signed our charter. You knew what we were offering. We're not changing this. This is non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. And when it came to that, I was the rock of the school, and I would not bend on the philosophy. It's like, no, don't come and ask me to start doing classes that kids haven't asked for and stuff. No. And so it was almost like the buck stops with Nicolette, because it's like, I was so sold on the philosophy. It's like, no, we're not doing that. So any group of parents or a group of parents and kids, they're wanting to set something up, I think it's really, really important that they decide what exactly are they going to be offering. And then, of course, there's room for change, there's room for negotiation. But what we ended up figuring out in our school, and again, it was that same young man who did I'm not defending anything in my thesis. He actually boycotted our campus meetings at one point, because we had the charter that my colleague and I had put together, and it came up somehow in a campus meeting one time that the charter could only be changed, basically the charter couldn't be changed unless Rick or myself, or unless we agreed to change it or something. And he's like, wait a minute, this is a democracy. How can you and Rick be the ones to change the chart? No. And he's like, if that's how it's going to be, I'm not coming to this meeting anymore, because the school's a farce. It's not a democracy. I'm out. And so he refused to come back to campus meeting. And so, of course, we had to have a big discussion about this. It's like, oh, this is true. Like, yes, because it was just Rick and myself when we were starting the school. There was nobody else. We're the ones who wrote the charter, and we absolutely wanted it protected, because we didn't want any parent or anybody to be able to come in and say, well, we're changing it now, because that actually happened at the original Sudbury Valley School, because they're run by a board. So the way they're set up in the States or whatever, they had to have a board, and the board was made up of parents and whatever. And they actually had a year that was super stressful, because a whole bunch of parents on the board wanted to fundamentally change the school and how it was run. And so it was terrible. It was this big crisis for the school, because suddenly these parents that weren't really supposed to have any power had all this power to actually change the operation and philosophy of the school. And so Rick and I learned from that and said, no, that's not happening at our school. So we made our charter and we said, this is non-negotiable. But then something came up where it was like, well, this is, whatever happened. And so we realized, like, we need to actually, if we got this charter and we're a democracy and the kids are equal to the staff, we have to make this so that if something does need to be changed in the charter, that it can be. But again, we're not involving the parents, because they have too many fears and too many wishes and too many things that don't necessarily line up. So we said, okay, by consensus in the community of the students and the staff, if somebody wants to change something in the charter, it's got to come up at campus meeting, and it has to be a consensus. So it's not majority vote on this one. It's got to be a consensus if the charter is going to be changed. And so after we agreed on that, our young man came back to the meetings. He was like, okay, we're a democracy. I'm okay now. So that was a fantastic experience. But yeah, like any school group, you've got to narrow down what you're offering. You've got to, like if you've got a group of parents, what is learning to you? How do children learn? Or go backwards the way the Sudbury Valley School did. Who do you want them to be when they're 18? And how do you want to help them develop that? And then nail it down, put it on paper so that you can say, this is what we're offering. Because otherwise you're just going to get this new parent comes in and says, oh, well, how about this? And this new parent comes in and says, well, I don't like that. No, you've got to have it nailed down and say, this is what we're offering. If you don't like it, go down the street, go next door, make your own thing. Right. Exactly. Because otherwise you're going to get pulled apart. And we were not willing to go in that direction. So we just said, nope, we're not giving our parents any power. Sorry, parents. But we just had enough experience that, with people who are like, well, I love this philosophy, but it scares me. Can't we just do a little of this? No. Get over your fears. That's your thing. And let your kid just be free at the school.
So the clarity of your framing was there to just make everything kind of really straightforward, I guess, instead of just implode or...
Yes. And by the same token, we weren't anti-parent in any way. Parents were welcome at the school, but they had to come in by the same process as any other adult. So they had to come in as a volunteer. So some people, some parents are used to going to their kids' school and volunteering and, being in the classroom all day and whatever. Again, we didn't do that at our school because when kids are in a super free environment like that and then their parent comes in, it changes how the child behaves. Yeah. And suddenly the kid's like, oh, geez, I've been playing video games for 5 hours and my mom knows that now, so I better go do something else, which is not what he wants. It's what he thinks because his mom is there, right? So we wanted to protect the kids from that. So we had a volunteer policy that anybody could apply for, and it was just they had to submit certain paperwork like the police criminal checks, all that kind of stuff. And then they had to come be at the school for a while, kind of hang out and get to know the kids a little bit. And then they had to come to the campus meeting and make a presentation saying, I understand your philosophy. This is what I understand of it. And then they had to say what they had to offer. And then if the kids liked them, they voted them in. If they didn't like them, no, we don't want you, sorry. We had that happen to one person. It wasn't a parent, but so we did have that happen. But yeah, so the parents had to go through the same processes as any other adult just because we wanted to protect the kids in their freedom. And so again, that's something that a school community would have to decide based on whatever... what is the parent involvement going to be? Some schools maybe need all the parents to help out and to make it run. And that's totally fine too. It's just a matter of figure it out. What are you going to do? What do you want? What are you going to offer?
And what's the target? What do you want the result to be? If they're going to be democratic and self-governing, then this is a great environment for that. But if the target is something different, then maybe there's a different pathway to it.
Yeah.
But clarity.
And another thing that I think that any parents and stuff wanting to do a school, they need to really understand what's required and what's not. For example, we had parents coming to us and, oh, well, how's my child going to be ready for the provincial achievement test in grade 6? It's like, your child doesn't have to write that. What? So kids don't have to write the provincial achievement test. Kids don't have to write diploma exams. Kids don't need a high school diploma to go to university. Parents need to educate themselves on these things so that they actually know what the rules are. And so they're not trying to set something up thinking that the kids have to do something that they totally don't have to do. So we spent quite a bit of time in our preparation year, especially on the post-secondary thing. Like, okay, so how are we going to get these kids into post-secondary? We're not in the States where the Sudbury Valley has kind of created all these inroads with universities because all their fantastic graduates have gone there.
And you found a pretty cool way, hey, here in Alberta. Anyway.
We did find a fantastic way. There's the University of Athabasca, and their only entrance requirement is that a student has to be 16. They don't need any previous marks. They don't need anything. All they have to do is turn 16. And as soon as they're 16, they can start taking online classes. And whatever, like usually we recommend things like English 255, which is a basic English class. And then those courses are transferable to other universities. So then they start online with Athabasca University, and then if they want to go to any other institution, they just take those courses, transfer them over, and get into other universities that way. So like I've told so many high school students, like, ditch high school, get out of there and just start taking Athabasca University when you're 16. So that way, while all your friends are still busy getting a high school diploma, you're working on a university degree. You can save yourself 2 years of your life. But how many people know this? Very, very, very few.
Yeah.
I mean, all the high schools would empty out if you told the kids this, right? So the government would like lose all their students. It would be a disaster, right? So we're not going to tell the kids they don't need a high school diploma, because that's what everybody thinks, right? Well, got to have a high school diploma. No, you don't. So yeah, that was brilliant when we found that one out.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That'll be good news maybe to some people listening to this.
Yeah.
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 Well, I actually posted it on Facebook at one point when I came back to homeschool facilitating. I just put it on one of the homeschool groups, and I said, like, are you aware, all these homeschooling parents, are you aware of this? And I was really surprised by the number of homeschooling parents who were not aware of it. And what really disappointed me in that is that their facilitators should be telling them that. But unfortunately, money talks even with a lot of homeschooling boards. And so homeschooling boards get a lot more money when kids do provincial curriculum, especially at the high school level. So a lot of the homeschool boards are driven to push those kids into high school courses, because then they get more money. So that's one of the reasons I posted on there, because I know that, and I would rather that the kids save 2 years of their life and go to Athabasca University than get their homeschooling board more money by doing the curriculum courses.
Thanks for doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nicolette, thank you for taking a stand for children to learn what they want to learn, and taking a stand for their innate brilliance so that can be preserved and then keep being a resource that they have, rather than having it schooled out of them.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we saw so many kids kind of come back to life at my school. It was really beautiful. Really beautiful.
Well, I sure do hope that more kids around the world can come back to life, especially now when we need their brilliance and their genius. And yeah, thank you for telling us about this again. I love hearing about it again. And I know that you've told me over the years, anytime I wanted to get going with setting up something, that you've already sent me all your documentation. I still have it in my computer, so I could use it anytime. And that you just are really gung-ho about people like Sudbury Valley School, like, take this, run with it, ask me any questions.
Yeah. And definitely, like, it when people if they want to set something up, the easiest way to do it is just have all the students sign up as homeschoolers, and then just attend whatever center you have. I mean, you can go through the process of being a private school, a charter school, whatever. There are so many hoops to jump through. Just sign your kids up as homeschoolers and run with that. Yeah. But of course, you have to make sure you have a board that's going to be user friendly and that's going to support whatever kind of school mode you decide to have. So that's another thing to look into. Yeah, but yeah, as far as any school groups, I mean, if anybody's interested in a Sudbury model school, obviously I can speak to unschooling from here to the moon as well. But if anybody's interested in a Sudbury model school, I still have all my documents. I'm willing to share them with anybody, and amazing. I'm willing to answer any questions. I'm willing to be a resource, whatever. Yeah.
Rock on. I'm glad to hear that. Thanks for your service in the world. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I love that too. So they can just register as homeschooling students and then just go somewhere and do what they want to do. Okay, amazing.
They're friends.
Yeah.
Beauty.
Yeah. But again, I mean, they're like that was one of the problems that we ran into was in our first 2 years, we just told our parents, sign up with a homeschooling board. So we had parents with this board and that board and that board and that board. And the problem we ran into was that some families had great facilitators who totally supported their kids being at our school, and other families were with facilitators who were trying to shove curriculum down the kids' throats and threatening the parents, well, your kid's just going to be a burger flipper when he grows older. And it was just like, what? And so I think in our third year, we actually went shopping as a school for a board. And we said, we want one board that all of our kids can sign up with. And we need that board to fully understand and support what we're doing. And so we ended up aligning with Education Unlimited. And they're an unschooling board. They don't offer any curriculum at all. And because I'm a certified teacher, they hired me to be the facilitator for all of the students in our school. So it worked out really, really beautifully. So that's definitely another thing, that if parents are going to go the route of homeschooling boards, they definitely need to make sure that their families are aligning with boards that are going to fully support whatever it is that they're doing. Yeah.
Wow, is there any last things you want to add?
I can only say that, man, when you set kids free, freedom with responsibility, the magic that can happen is just beyond the beyond. It is so beautiful to watch kids light up, to watch them discover the things that they're passionate about, we had kids who would come to school when they're sick because they felt better coming to school and they were happier coming to school than if they'd stay home. And we had kids who didn't want summer holidays and kids who didn't want long weekends. And, when you have that happening all the time, you can't, the only thing you can do is just feel amazing. So, yeah, it's so worth it. Our school only ran for 6.5 years, but they were definitely 6.5 of the most magical years of my life. Absolutely, without question. Yeah.
I don't know how far we want to go in the interview, but do you want to talk about why it ended or what changed?
Yeah, pretty simple. Toward our 6th year, I guess, towards the end of our 6th year, we ended up having some financial problems, and we ended up losing that beautiful 9,000 square foot house we were in. So we had to move. And the only place we could really find that we could afford was back in the city. It was kind of this rundown, dingy place. And we just lost so many students when we moved. We tried really valiantly to keep going, but after 6 months, it was like, yeah, we just can't, we can't keep going. There's not enough kids. There's not enough money. So we had to fold. So that was very sad, but I just kept unschooling my own daughter, and she's 15 now, and she's amazing. So it worked out okay, but yeah.
And I know that some of the families still kept potting up and in each other's lives. And
yeah, the kids, a lot of them are still friends and still get together and connected, and it's beautiful. Yeah.
So even though it died, it still kind of sent some seeds and something new. Yeah. New things came of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. You're willing to talk to people too that are interested.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a Sudbury school. If people have, just questions about, do you think this would work or do you think that would work? Just shoot them my way. I'm perfectly willing to at least offer my opinion, or based on my experience, what I would think of that, or
Beauty.
Cool.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.